Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Sorry, Mr. Williamson, I think you might have jumped the queue here a little bit. Mr. Speaker, I stand on behalf of New Zealand First to speak in the third reading of the Gambling Amendment Bill number 3. And we are in a position where we want to make it very clear to the people listening and understanding what our position is we do not condone any form of liberalisation of gambling, and that we need to make sure that we've got everything that we can possibly do to tighten up and regulate this sector, this industry particularly, sir. But Mr. Speaker, we can't actually support this bill where it sits on the table at the moment, although there are some very amiable qualities within this bill that New Zealand First supports, sir. And listening to some of the speakers and what they've got to say, there's been some very good contributions today and certainly some well-planned discussions on it, and we've gone through many of these before. This bill particularly, though, has come a long way from the first chance that I had to speak to it in the second reading to where it is now. So coming out of Select Committee in the second reading and then going through the Committee of the Whole House to where it sits on the table is a completely different bill than what we first looked at. And although we still are not supporting this bill, sir, I'd like to talk about the main reason is why we can't support it, but also talk about some of the positive things that this bill has in it. But before I get to that, I think it needs to be addressed of some of the things that that has been brought up into the House. It's about harm minimisation. And it is very important to note the trajectory, the way in which we are travelling and tracking in this country downwards in respect to the number of gamblers that are suffering from gambling issues and that harm that we are starting to move into a much more reduced space of. Mr. Speaker, the statistics of the actual gambling community, if that's the right term, is 0.03% of people that have 0.03% of those gamblers that have a problem with gambling. And Mr. Speaker, there's nothing that breaks down what a gambler constitutes, is how much of it is actually involved with Class 4 gambling, how much of it is involved with the casino, what is involved with TAB. Sir, the elephant in the room, of course, now is online gambling, and then, of course, you've got lotto and very many other forms of gambling. So to throw stones at an industry that I think strongly is tracking in the right direction is the wrong thing to do. And nothing, not a single thing in this piece of legislation, in the Gambling Amendment Bill number 3, does anything to help problem gamblers, not only in Class 4 gambling, but least of all does nothing to put conditions around the Sky City Casino, which are basically a law unto themselves. They've been given an opportunity to print copious amounts of money that there is no openness and no transparency in. Thank you, sir. And that, to me, is very hypocritical when we are coming down so hard on Class 4 gambling. And every cloud has a silver lining, sir, and the silver lining to Class 4 gambling in this particular instance is the fact of what it does for our communities insofar as the help that it actually commits. $250 odd million. That number is coming down, the amount of money that has been given to communities, sporting clubs, cultural clubs, schools, arts clubs, and the plethora of other community groups and organisations and events that use that money to help get those events underway. I don't believe that that's a tax, as it was said by Mr. Ian Lees-Galloways, on the poor people. The vast majority of people, as we've already outlined and agreed to on both sides of the floor, that the vast majority of people actually gamble willingly and have it in a controlled stance and have it under control. Mr. Speaker, the position that we hold is that we as a society need to be doing everything absolutely possible as a government to ensure that we capture and help those people that need the help, which again this doesn't particularly address, and I think that is a larger issue, the helplines, etc., that where somebody can go to actually help themselves get through it. We've heard of facial recognition technology, pre-commit cards. They've tried PIDs and pods on certain outlets to see if having breaks in between gambling is going to help. And the reality is, sir, that this will actually help drive the industry, the people that are in the gambling, that like to gamble, into those large casinos. because this is not going to do anything but actually shut down some of these small operations. And we've heard from the Greens to say that these bars operate with their the basis of their business is for gambling. Well, that's been long outlawed. That stopped in the mid-2000s, early 2000s, that if your primary business in a licensed premises was to have gaming machines and secondary was food and alcohol, then of course those licences were revoked. Your primary business in a licensed premises, whether it be an on-licence or a club, is for entertainment, for social engagement, for having a beer, watching the rugby, catching up with your friends, having a meal or whatever. And subsequent to that is obviously some of those facilities allow themselves to have a gaming machine room, which of course is putting as much money back into our communities for those community groups that need that money the most. So the reason why we can't support this bill, Mr Speaker, and we put an amendment section 30A in the bill as supplementary order paper in the Committee of the Whole House stage, we would like to say that it was close, but we were the only party that actually voted for it. But it was close insofar as there has been some changes already around allowing commission-based payments to licensed premises as being a way of funding it. Because real, actual and necessary is an absolutely antiquated, clunky, ambiguous way of trying to determine how much we're going to pay as a site rental for those premises that choose to have them. And the reality is, payments do need to be made. There are costs involved in hosting those machines. There is good that comes out of parts of this sector of the market of Class 4 gambling. And so we can't support it because, of course, the ability to charge 1.5% of the gross turnover, which is in line with other sectors of the gambling, the TAB and Lotto, for example, it's in line with that, was shot down in the House. So, Mr Speaker, we won't be putting our support into this. I'd like to now just give you a couple of things that New Zealand First does commend within the bill that I think are very commendable aspects of it, and one of them is the openness and transparency. Nobody wants to see behind-door deals with societies and with bar owners or operators or licensed premises and those community groups that are seeking funding. And over the decades, because there has been about 20 years of this going on, there has been a small group of people that have taken advantage of the silver lining in the cloud, if you like, and taken it for their own personal gain as opposed to what it was designed for. And they've given the industry, in my view, at times a bad name. And it's come up a few times, and I can certainly give you some specifics, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I'm not here to go into those specifics. But largely, and I mean most largely, this industry is acting well and truly within the confines of the law and the intent that it was designed to do. But having it open and transparent, understanding how those grants are allocated and making sure that there is no degree of separation or any, what's the term that they use, conflicts of interest, Mr Speaker, when those grants have been made, I think is a very commendable thing and certainly well supported by New Zealand First. The simplification in compliance, I think, is very important. And over the years, what I have seen with some of those DIA inspectors, the laws have been open to interpretation. And those DIA officers and inspectors that have come into licensed premises to inspect them have had completely conflicting and differences of opinion with one operator to another and with one DIA officer to another. And so tightening that up certainly, and simplifying that aspect is going to be a great help to the people that could be certainly affected. And finally, sir, I'll finish on by saying that the improvement in the efficiency for appeals, I think having that more open, that more transparent is certainly going to help things as well, and making this industry more streamlined, sir, moving forward to the future. We are very sad to say that we can't support it. We made our position very, very clear at the start with regards to the 1.5% commission payments for site operators. That was certainly not an over-the-top figure that we thought was balanced and certainly easy to figure out. But in saying that our support does not go with this bill, we support a majority of what's in it. Thank you, Mr Speaker.